I just sat down to record, which means cue children straight through the front door. How do they always know? They've been outside for like 2 hours, haven't seen them, they've just been roaming. And then as soon as I hit that record button, they need water, they have to use the bathroom, they ask me something. It's just like they know that I'm trying to do something. Well, hey, and welcome back to The Commonplace. My name is Autumn Kern, and I am actually refilming a video that I made months ago at this point. I was still freshly postpartum. I think I was around 8 to 10 weeks, and I decided to do a home librarian video about what I was reading in the postpartum, because that is definitely something that we here like to know about. What do you read after you have a baby? Where were your interests? How were you feeling? What was going on in your mind and heart? Those sorts of things. And I lost the video because a child of mine walked by when I was importing the files and pulled the card reader from my computer, and the entire file corrupted. I could not save it. I tried many times, and then I just couched it. I was like, well, you know what? It didn't happen. That happens sometimes with a video. And in Common House, I had so many people say, no, I really would like to at least have a list of what you were reading. It's, you know, I talk about books, so then people want to know what books I'm reading. I get it. And I thought it was a fun list of books. I like to know what people read in different transitory periods of their life as well, so I'm back to making it. So now my daughter is 6 months old, but I'm revisiting what I read. I made the list, I still have it so that we can run through those books, even though they're not the books I'm reading. This is not what I've read over the last 6 months. This is what I read in the first 8 weeks. I did make a video at this point last year, a year and a half ago, that was kind of like moods for the postpartum, books you might want to read in your postpartum, because at that time, my darling sister-in-law and one of my great friends, they were both having babies, and so it sort of sparked this, what might I want to read in the postpartum? And I talk about different moods. I think of my reading literary life sort of like when people get dressed. You don't really know what you want until you get to that day, especially if you're on a trip. How do I know what book I'm gonna wanna read until it's that morning and I wake up and see how I feel? And so with the postpartum, I think that it's good to give yourself a lot of freedom. So we're gonna focus in here now. I have a handful of books that I read in that first 8 weeks that I'm going to share, but mixed into this video, I'm also going to share 7 or so tips about how to read more when you're in a transition period, because maybe you're moving, maybe you're pregnant, maybe you're having a baby, who knows what's happening in your world. But those transition times, it can feel like the first thing you lose maybe is your literary life, your mother culture, just time to engage in great ideas. And so I have some tips on how to keep that time, or maybe flex a bit so that it looks a little bit different, but you're still enjoying and receiving the formative benefits of a great literary life. So to get started, I did read a number of books that are specific to my Christian tradition, and so they're not going to be appropriate for everyone, and that's okay. One of them was called, oh, actually I forgot to say, my library is still being unpacked in the new house. We lost some shelves. I think have 17 to 20 book boxes left, and so I don't know where all of my books are right now, which is hard for me. But I'm going to just put the covers up on the screen so you can see them rather than holding them up as I usually do, because I don't know where they all are right now, and that is sad for me, but we're gonna continue. So back to the tradition books that were specific to me. This is kind of a category that I think all moms will understand, particularly Christian moms, that you do want some encouragement as you are moving through a phase that requires great sacrifice. I mean, beyond the being pregnant, which is a giving up of your body for life, it kind of echoes, this is my body broken for you. To our children, we image in the home of our bodies what is going to be the home of their lives, and ultimately their home found in God. It's really beautiful, but you sometimes need those reminders when you're sleep deprived, when everything kind of hurts, things are healing. You know what I mean if you've had some children. And so in that vein, I had a book called A Sacred Beginning, which I really liked because it was spaced out for a certain number of days. Within my tradition, the first 40 days is considered a very protective time in which the mother and child should not be out in the world. They are not even allowed at church. They are supposed to be home, resting, bonding, healing, having this deeply beautiful time that protects both of them. It's supposed to be a gift to both of them. And so this book actually followed out the 40 days, talking about the glorious realities of the mundane parts of motherhood and postpartum, helping you see the way you were imaging Christ in your life, the practices that you could still engage in, the prayer, especially the prayer life, things like that, while you were maybe in bed or keeping a low profile at home, trying to care for other children, receiving help and care from other women or other families. And it was just at that point incredibly encouraging. It was also very short. So I tried to start each of my postpartum mornings with that read before I dove into other reading or before I dove into scripture, things like that. And it was just like having a mom friend who knew exactly where I was at, exactly what I might need for encouragement, or, you know, a funny story that I could relate to, something like that. And even though this was my 4th time going through the postpartum period, it was just like a big hug. It was a big book hug. Book hugs are really good. And so that was the first book. Related to that was another book called The Aesthetic Lives of Mothers, which you'll see here. And that's a book all about prayer, that we should be praying for our children very often. I've even been encouraged by the idea that when I'm saying something frequently to a child, like that kind of constant reminder, the thing you're working on or the thing that's just really frustrating to you as a mother in that moment, in that season, that rather than constantly talking to my child about it, I should first make sure I'm putting more time into talking to God about it and then speak to my child. And so it's always good to just have the encouragement to be praying more, right? But also within this book, there are a lot of historic prayers or prayer prompts or different things you could memorize or commit to memory, I guess, and use as hooks. I really like hooks. One thing that I like about historic prayer or practices or liturgical repetitive things, which I know some people can say can be rote and dry. We'll put a pin in that for a second. But I like them because they offer you a hook. Maybe when you're floundering, maybe when you don't know what to do, you just grab that and start with the first line, and hopefully it leads you into a deeper contemplative prayerful state. Back to the rote and dry. Sometimes things are rote and dry. That is true, and yet we still ought to do them. Right action right action often leads to right feeling, and then that's what you move for. Rather than waiting for right feeling to come, you need to do the right behavior. So I will put that plug in there. If you've never considered maybe memorizing creeds or historic church prayers or anything like that, it might be a help to you in any sort of transition period where you feel a little out of sorts and you just need to firmly plant your feet and feel grounded and know what your next right thing is to do. Okay, the last two in this category, one is called Children in the Church Today and one is called Blueprints for the Little Church. Again, tradition specific, but there are versions of these books, I would say, in other traditions. These are just the two that I read. And one was more of like a theological understanding of children in the church, the duty we have to them, the gift they are to us, and the other being more of the practical application of the faith into the home, again, within the bounds of being able to talk to a priest. For this book, a priest, you would maybe want to consider a pastor. I know we have a rather ecumenical group around the Commonplace and try to stay as charitable as we can with that. And so that was sort of my tradition group. It was like the Christian mom books that I wanted to read, and those were set there. But then for further reading, I really did not give myself a planned list. If you've been around here, if you've seen my Mother Academia, I love a color-coded list. I love a plan. I love knowing what I'm gonna do to make sure I get it all done. It is just part of my DNA. I really like it. But this year, knowing it would be a weird year, knowing I'd be pregnant for the first third, the postpartum the second third, I thought I'd just be doing school and co-op in the third, but instead I was moving, and then the holidays come up in the fourth. Why am I saying the thirds? I'm talking about quarters. First quarter, I think the trimester threw me off. First quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. I knew it would just be a weird year. So my Mother Academia was more embodied learning, things with music, with instruments, rather than book learning. I did not have a color-coded spreadsheet. I'm excited for Mother Academia next year. Perhaps the color-coded notion will come back. But I do think one tip, so here's the first tip, for a season of transition is to lose the shoulds and oughts. This is something that can be very crippling for a particular personality. I know that everyone who engages with the resources I make, they are not the same as me. They don't think like me, their minds don't work like mine, but I also know there are a lot of you that are very similar to me. It's kind of what attracts us to one another. And so if you are someone who can often feel the oughts and shoulds, I ought to be using my time to read Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics or David Hicks' Norms and Nobility. I should be touching The Discarded Image by C.S. Lewis right now. But you are in a season where you are sleeping 3.5 hours a night, your body is healing, you have 3 other children to take care of, and oh my goodness, you decided to move. It's okay if you don't touch David Hicks. It's okay if you put down C.S. Lewis' Discarded Image in favor of C.S. Lewis' The Screwtape Letters. It's okay to read for delight. And I actually would argue that when you are in a season that is difficult, transitive, something like that, delight is the thing that's going to keep you coming back to your book. It's going to keep you from getting on the internet. It's going to keep you from getting on the phone. It's going to keep you from just kind of walking around your house, really not doing anything at all, just sort of, moving as we do. It will call you back, because who doesn't want to read a great book? I just read, this was not on my list, but I just read George MacDonald's The Lost Princess, or A Double Story. I was so into it that every time I had a free minute, which is not a lot in this season of life, but when I did, I was straight to that book. And it's because it was delightful. it was calling out something in me. It was making my mind think. I was tinkering over the characters when I was cooking dinner, or I was rocking a baby. I just could not get over the story. That is really powerful when you're struggling to read. Stick with delight. Okay, so that kind of leads to my second tip, which is to receive the gift of humility. Usually we don't like to receive that gift. We feel a little bristly about it because we like to think that we can do it all, or we can keep up, or we can be the perfect classical mother teacher, whatever it is for you. I, unfortunately, probably suffer from all three of those. But really, when we're in these seasons, we're given the gift of humility if we'll receive it. And that, again, goes back to reading for delight, not reading like you have to keep up with the classical Joneses, or that you need to do these things right now. But actually, virtue requires that you can rightly see, which is prudence. You can rightly see your life circumstances, the good that needs to be done, the good that needs to be left undone, and how it is that you continue to move towards that ideal type of Christ in this season. The actual life you have, reading for the actual life you have, not reading for the internet or reading for some imaginary best list, whatever it is. And so I have some delight reads that I'm going to share. So those are my first two tips. My delight reads, let's pivot over to PG Wodehouse. I love Wodehouse. I've talked about how I will read Wodehouse whenever I need a good snort laugh. His British humor delights me to no end. And Wodehouse he's sort of like a Wendell Berry in that all of his characters overlap, his places overlap in his books, although Wendell Berry, not as funny, and that's okay, different type of read, and he is on my list, of course, but Wodehouse is where I go when I know I need a laugh. And so I decided to read Blanding's Castle, which continues with, Freddie. Freddie is a character. Freddie is a real pain in his family's general bum, if you will, but I think Freddie's pretty funny. And then, of course, you have Lord Emsworth, who loves his gardens, loves his land, loves generally being left to the aristocratic life without Freddie's antics. And he has a lot of characters around him that just delight me to no end. And so if you've never read Wodehouse, I do recommend that you read Leave It to P. Smith, but you say Leave It to Smith. That's my favorite, but then the whole Jeeves series is kind of popular with everyone else. And yes, technically there is an order to the books, but I think you can kind of just jump in and figure it out if you want to. So that was one of my delight reads. Another one is to consider the unknown possibilities, I guess. This is a tip. So when I was in my postpartum in that 8 weeks, there was our large library book sale it's like the big one for the year. My daughter and I always go to it. This time it was my daughters and we went to it. We're out there bright and early at an ungodly hour in order to beat people. I will say we've been going to this yard sale. We've been going to this library sale for, she's almost 9, so 7 years, 6 years, somewhere in there. We've been going for a really long time. And we know people at this book sale. Like, we know the people who are there in line to compete with us for the better spots. And it's a really fun community, the book sales. Anyways, not the point of today. Rather that you may come across a book that you were not planning to read. And that is good. Just be open to a new book. Go to the library, roam the shelves. Again, finding something interesting that maybe you weren't feeling like you had to read or you weren't planning on reading might help you keep reading. So for me, that ended up being this book called Saints in Folklore. I found it at the library sale. I obviously was not intending to find it. I had never heard of it, but in it, I'm trying to remember, there were different essays about certain saints whose histories became folklore in different places around the world, which was pretty cool. So of course you have Saint Nicholas of Myra, the bishop who launched 1,000 Santa Clauses, if you will. His life is actually really wonderful and interesting, and St. Nicholas is a great person for you and your children to know. Since we are coming up on, actually, I'm already thinking ahead towards the Nativity because it's October and my alarm goes off, which I don't know if I've talked about on YouTube before. Maybe I'll film a video about that. If you're interested, let me know below. It's something I did for Common House last year. How I plan liturgically requires certain alarms set on my calendar to go off annually a little ahead so that I'm prepared for when things come, so that it's not, Thanksgiving night and you're like, Advent starts in 2 days, which often happens on the Western calendar. So anyways, if that's something of interest to you, how you plan those sorts of liturgical things, let me know below. But anyways, St. Nicholas was in there, St. Catherine of Alexandria was in there, St. George, of course, was in there. St. George and the Dragon is actually based on the Saint George, and a number of people like that. But some of those are our patron saints in our family, and so I was, of course, interested in reading about how their tales, their stories actually became folklore. So that was one, didn't plan on having. Another one I didn't plan on having that I also found at the same library book sale was Wendell Berry. I can see it on the floor. The title was Our Only World. It's a collection of essays. I was not familiar with that collection, and so I did not plan to read it, and yet it came, and it leads me to my next tip, which is to know your literary friends. So whenever personally, Autumn Curran, am tempted towards convenience, modern convenience, or hi, my baby's down there and she's very cute. So whenever I'm tempted towards something like convenience, trying to make my life easier, trying to use these modern inventions that I do think chip away at the human soul, it don't altogether harm the human soul, I know I need to go pull Wendleberry off the shelf. He is the literary friend that will give me a kick in the pants to chase my ideals, however imperfectly I chase them. I am not a Wendleberry. I do not live on a farm. I do not eschew all technology other than my truck, but I do have my ideal lines that are drawn in certain places. Everyone does. And whenever I feel like I'm not committed to them anymore, even though I can't do them perfectly, you know what I mean? There's a difference between trying to do them and then kind of giving up on them, because it's just easier to not. Whenever I reach that point, which is tempting in a transition period to give up the things that matter to you in order to have things more easily done, I go back to Wendleberry. And so I did read that collection. Actually, that set me off on a huge Wendleberry read right towards the beginning of the summer or the end of spring. And so I just dove head first. And again, not having a reading list allowed me the freedom to pursue little rabbit trails that I found, which I really did enjoy. That was one thing I learned in my mother academia, is I have to plan to need to do rabbit trails. If I'm completely locked in and there isn't any wiggle room, I will just start forgetting my plans, because I'm like, well, this is interesting. I want to read about it. I am an adult. I can read about it. And so I do have to leave myself that wiggle room. And that did allow me to read a whole lot of Wendleberry and to revisit some old favorites, some favorite essays, things like that. If you've never read Why I Don't Own a Computer, or Why I Don't Have a Computer, that's an excellent one. But then his responses to the responses about his wife and his typewriter are also pretty grand. He is a masterful writer, full of wit, and also very committed to his ideals. So he's a good friend for something like that. So another one that I read for delight was Sense and Sensibility, which is of course Jane Austen. I had mentioned in Common House that I knew I'd probably end up reading Woodhouse and Austen sometime in my postpartum, because they're just friends that I like to spend time with. And so yes, knowing your literary friends for giving you a kick of the pants, but also for the ones that you enjoy spending time with, is important. So I did read Sense and Sensibility as well. Now, another tip is to read books. I don't think we get enough attention or credit to the power of rereading. I actually had an interview last season 4 on the podcast, which you can actually watch on YouTube, with Laura Wolf and Lisa Rose about the magic of rereading. Because particularly in Charlotte Mason circles, you will hear, no, we don't reread, we don't do that. But that's just in the context of formal lessons. We don't reread material that children need to narrate to us, because it teaches them the habit of inattention. But we should absolutely revisit books that we've loved and we want to see again. So Sense and Sensibility, technically a reread, but some other ones. I reread No Drama Discipline. Don't know about you, but when I'm in transition periods, often the habits in my home go awry. I lose them quickly. And particularly something like being pregnant, your third trimester, I was very sick. I had an iron issue, so I needed infusions. I kind of lost the first 3 months of the year. I was just not myself to any degree. And I was doing that thing you do when you're stuck on the couch and you're yelling, guys, don't do that. And you know that's not going to actually command obedience in anyone, because you sound like an exasperated teenager. So by the time I had my baby, I really needed to get habits back on track. I needed to sort of give myself a little pep talk, get back on the right page of how we teach in our home, how we hopefully instruct our children back towards the path of life. And so I did reread No Drama Discipline, which is written by the same authors who wrote The Whole Brain Child, which is another book I really enjoy and often recommend for a parenting book. I actually think novels make better parenting books, like Little Men, one of the best parenting books ever. But I do think a good parenting book can be a help, and No Drama Discipline is one of those. So I did reread that one. I also reread Home Education. I am teaching through it in Common House. It's a self-paced course. It's a slow read, but we're going through, I'm adding context to the Victorian speech. I'm putting Mason in context with Mason and other classical educators. I'm sharing funny stories and tidbits, things like that, just through mostly audio. Some of it are written lessons, but most of it's through an audio lesson. And so I did start rereading through Home Education as well during my postpartum, and that was for the course, which you can totally check out if you want to check out Common House. And then another reread was Attending the Heart of Virtue, which is about how fairy tales, stories awaken the moral imagination. This is a great book. Fantastic. Vegan Gorian, I think he is tremendous. Absolutely tremendous. And for those who have maybe been Disney-fied in their fairy tales, he breaks down some of the most popular fairy tales and explains them, one, in their original meaning, and two, how they help cultivate certain appetitive leanings, affections, orientations towards the good life, all really important things. And I reread this one for 2 reasons back then. I actually do remember why I reread this one. One, I'm the humanities tutor at our co-op. I teach fairy tales. That's one of the things I do with my Form 1 students. And so I kind of wanted a refresher. I wanted to revisit some of these fairy tales, but also in parenting. Like I said, we were getting back on track, and getting back on track can feel like playing whack-a-mole. If you're a mom who feels like you're just playing whack-a-mole all the time in transition seasons or just generally, I would like to remind you that you have more than one way to teach your child. Telling them a rule all of the time is not the only way to teach them. You can also play a game. You can tell a story. You can read stories. You can come at a habit from so many different angles, but you cannot come at a habit from all of them at one time, right? We are limited. Back to that gift of humility, particularly in seasons of transition. So I just made the conscious decision that over the summer, the way I was going to work on some things I was seeing in my children was through story. Of course, I was going to remind them how kernels act, our family rules. Of course, I was going to say, you may not, if you continue to do this, this will be the consequence. However, my primary mode of teaching over the summer was story. It was a lot of fairy tales. And to that, I also have another tip: use audio. Now, if you were thinking, I have a lot of talkative children, we're all very verbal, so are my kids. I cannot listen to audiobooks. When moms get online at the end of every year and they say I read 74 books, 48 of them were through Audible, I don't know how they had the time. I just don't understand, because my kids are always talking to me. But I have found that if you will use audio to listen to things with your children, you can listen to quite a lot, especially in terms of books. And so we listened through, in that first 8 weeks, the Red Fairy book, which is by Andrew Lang, but the narrator we like is Simon Hester. He did the Blue Fairy book, the Red Fairy book. We actually just found him on Water Babies by Charles Kingsley. We needed to listen to it while we were driving somewhere. And what do you know, he starts talking, we're all like, it's Blue Fairy Book Guy. And so that was really exciting. He's a great narrator. We also listened through In a Certain Land, which is on the Cersei Network. It's Deacon Nicholas Kotar's podcast. He tells Slavic fairy tales. He is one of the best narrators I've ever heard. He has so much conviviality and suspense and drama in his voice. The way he tells them, you can tell these are fairy tales that are in his bones. I wish I could tell a fairy tale the way he does. I loved it. He was also in season 4 of my podcast talking about the fairy tale tradition, so I will link that because it was a fascinating conversation. He knows so much, and he has been so deeply formed by them that as we were talking, I realized I don't even know fairy tales well enough to know really what to ask you, because you are so deep in them and they have made up so much of who you are, and your love, like actually in your heart, but also your intellectual love for them is so deep. I don't even know enough to know what to ask you about to really unlock the secrets of what you could tell me. But still, the conversation was so good. And so we really enjoyed listening through In a Certain Land. He also has actually print books. They're called In a Certain Kingdom, which is sort of the, I believe, the Eastern Once Upon a Time. And so that was fantastic. And another way that I actually did get a lot of reading in. So it was using audio, but using them with my children, not trying to separate from them, because in a season of transition, a lot of times you need more mom than you do at other times. And it would not have been helpful or appropriate in my family for me to have been, with my little earbuds in, trying to listen to something or playing it in the kitchen while kids were running around talking to me. I needed to be with them, and so we did it together, and that's another tip. And the other read that I did with my kids, so I also then had a read aloud. That's kind of a bonus tip off that one, is to choose a read aloud for your children that you also enjoy. It's a riff, of course, on C.S. Lewis, that if a child's book is only enjoyed by a child, it's not a very good children's book. They should be appealing to us. Are we old enough to once again enjoy fairy tales, that sort of thing? And so we did, and this will be contentious, I know, we did read Harry Potter, the first 3 books during that time, or a little bit beyond that time. I think we'd read the first 2 in that 8 weeks. And I read Harry Potter as a child and loved it. It was a taste of enchantment. It was a taste of the deeper reality that exists between good and evil, the battle within ourselves that is good and evil. And so there's another podcast interview actually you could listen to with Rachel Woodham. We talked about reads of requirement and why Harry Potter is one of those. And so yes, I do know that Harry Potter can be contentious. I understand this. I have a couple of videos on why we read fairy tales and stories with magic if you'd like to listen to those ideas, or if you'd like to leave me a comment. I always welcome charitable disagreements. That's fine with me. It is engaging over ideas, and this is honestly what the great conversation has been: a discourse, a conversation about what is good for the soul and maybe what is not good for the soul. And so I'll just leave that there. But we did also choose a read aloud that I enjoyed, that I could also just read aloud to the kids, because that's another way to get in your reading time. And then my last tip, I think this is my last tip, is something that I got from my friend Laura Whiffler back when I worked for Risen Motherhood. It's just this very simple: read a chapter every night before you go to bed. When you get in bed, take 10-15 minutes and read a chapter. Most books generally run between 10 and 15 chapters, which means you can read a book in about a week and a half, 2 weeks. And that's a really good pace to keep over the course of a year. And again, if the book is something you're interested in, you shouldn't fall asleep too quickly. Although I do understand if you clonk out pretty hard when you hit the pillow, sometimes I do too. But that is one way to get your reading time in. If you say, I really don't have time during the day, I would push back and say you probably do have time. I have never met a woman who really does not have any minutes to read during the day. And I'm suspicious of anyone who says they don't. I just think we tend to put our time in other places. And so, you know, maybe a tip is to evaluate your time and be honest with yourself about when you really could read. Now, the very last book that I did read during that time was The Death of Christian Culture by John Senior. It was my heady book. Sometimes it was a slow plod, but I'm very inspired by the work of Senior. Someone sent me The Restoration of Realism, which is about Senior, his work at the IHP, and basically I just became kind of enamored with this cowboy who turned college professor and who was able to help so many college students regain a right sense of reality. And I sort of felt like I wanted to be John Senior when I grew up. And so I decided to start reading his works as well. So I read The Death of Christian Culture, and I'm gonna keep moving on. I have not actually touched it again because it was a little too heady for how little sleep I was getting then, and sadly I'm still getting now, for being honest. But guess what? Again, that is my real life, as I have an infant, and I'm just not well rested. My brain is not working at its full autumn capacity because it's been given up out of love for a child, and that is okay. If you're there too, it is okay. So I think that's it. I think those were all the books that I read in that first 8 weeks, and I think those are the tips that I have for you. If you have tips, because I know we have a literary crowd around here, please put them below. If my baby has talked to your baby, you're welcome. I will be back actually next time with kind of an intro video to the new old house, because I will be talking about historic house projects as we are beginning some of these in the next couple of weeks. I am still trying to find the line of what is sharing about something cool and nerdy. Like I have a history degree. My mind has latched onto so many things about how this house was built, the families that were part of this house, this property, that I'm just bubbling. The historian in me is just bubbling to talk about them. But the mother and woman in me, wife in me, is like, protect your family's privacy. And so I'm trying to figure out how to do that at the same time, because who doesn't love a good story about something old around here, but also it's where I live. So we'll see how it shakes out, what all I can share and how I can do it. But thanks so much for being here. I will see you very soon. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that video and that it was a help to you as a home educator and a mother of little ones. I'd like to extend an invitation to you to come join us in Common House. It's the place where I say mother teachers get to go further up and further in through the classical wardrobe. Or another way, it's where we're learning how to make truth, beauty, and goodness something that our children and even ourselves get to experience through all 5 senses in an embodied way in our homes to inspire wonder and love for God and His world. We have over 800 mothers around the world, and we'd love to have you join us. Check it out.